What's up everyone, welcome back to another week's video. This week I'm talking about paddle length, and is your paddle appropriately length for you, or is it in fact too short? A lot of the times I'm out there on the river and I see people, especially people who are new to kayaking, but also people who have been around the block for a bit, and I look at them and I'm like looking at how they're going down the river, and I'm thinking, your day would probably be a lot easier if your paddle was a little bit longer. And this might not be true for every boating area in the world, but I know especially in this like Ottawa Valley region, there's like this old lag of people who are really into short paddles. And it's interesting, and there's some pros and cons to shorter paddles versus longer paddles, and it kind of got me thinking about appropriate paddle length and about what is best. And kind of like a lot of things I talk about on this channel, the best solution is actually what's best for you. But that might not be best for someone else, and it's going to vary a lot person to person depending on their body shape and their like ape index, so their length of their arms relative to their height. But I do think there's some general rules of thumb we can apply to paddles. So I want to talk about a bit about the pros and cons of shorter paddles versus longer paddles versus shorter paddles, and help you get an idea about what I'm using, about what my height is, and then hopefully that'll give you a bit of an insight onto what you could be doing. So whitewater paddles come in all different shapes and sizes, and if you're buying used versus buying new, make sure you do your homework about the paddle you're buying. Specifically speaking, that's to do with blade shape and how big the blade is in terms of its like top to bottom height and its like end-to-end length, because bigger blades are going to give more power, but they're also going to make your body more tired. So if you've got a blade that's too big for your body, you're going to get gassed out a lot easier, and you're just going to get to the end of your day and feel a lot more exhausted. Whereas if your paddle's about the right size for you, then you're not going to have that problem, and you're going to get to the end of the day and be like, oh yeah, it's pretty good. Sometimes you're going to have a blade that's too big for you, and you can be like, oh my god, it's going to rip my shoulders out, oh my goodness. And that's not always the case, but sometimes can be true. So definitely do your research on what blade shape and size you're buying, and if that's going to be right for you or not. It might be, it might not. But the main thing I want to talk about is actually the length of the paddle. We measure the length of our paddle tip to tip, so from this longest edge all the way down to the other end, the other longest edge, right? So what are the pros and cons to longer paddles versus shorter paddles? Well, longer paddles, generally you get a slower stroke rate, so the amount of total strokes you'll get in a minute is going to be slightly lower than a shorter paddle. The longer paddle is going to get more reach and more leverage, which can be really, really useful, especially for freestyle tricks where you have to push, so like especially on flat water freestyle tricks, especially on surfing waves where the wave is tall, because your paddle can actually reach down in the water. And especially, and probably most interestingly, importantly for a lot of people watching this video, a longer paddle is actually going to give you bigger leverage, which makes it easier to roll your kayak, easier to turn with a sweep stroke and stuff like that. So a longer paddle can make some of those foundational skills come a lot more quickly because you have a much bigger lever you're working with. That's useful, and obviously can easily be overlooked, and even the difference of just a few centimeters in paddle length is noticeable, especially when you're teaching people to kayak for the first time. If you give someone a 197 paddle for their, to use on their first day versus giving them a 188, it's only 9 centimeters difference, but you'll see a huge change in how quickly they pick up their roll, their sweep strokes, how much they're relying on their muscle power versus how much they're winding up and using their body, or able to wind up and use their body, because they have that like an extra lever tool there, right, in their hands. So even just a few centimeters can make a big difference. So when there are some times where you might want a shorter paddle, well, if you're like predominantly paddling in whitewater parks where you just want to get a high rep rate of strokes just to get on and off of a wave, in or out of a hole, you're just trying to go and get a short amount of strokes in a small period. Maybe you're catching a wave in the ocean where you have to just quickly get a bunch of strokes in, and then kind of back off. A short paddle might be really useful. If you're doing freestyle paddling specifically to hole boating, where you're doing a lot of cartwheel ends, you might not want a long paddle because you might want because the short paddle is going to allow your kind of the paddle to get out of your way a lot more, right? So you can rotate your body around a lot faster, and that helps your boat rotate around a lot faster. So for some people, having a long paddle is just going to end up being more than they can manage. And there's going to be a kind of a finite length, right, where it gets to too much paddle and it's like more than you can manage. Maybe you're hitting the bottom all the time, or maybe it's too much for you to use, or it's too slow for you to quickly move from one stroke to the next. And so there is a bit of a trade-off in that like optimal length. You obviously don't want to be trying to do like all your whitewater maneuvering with a 220 centimeter sea kayak paddle, right? That doesn't make sense. It's gonna be too big. So where's the fine line? Well, it's gonna be different, like I said, for every person. Let me give you the rundown of what I like and what I usually use. That is going to give you a bit of a ballpark on where you're going to go. So I stand 5 feet 11 inches, so not a super tall dude, but not super small. My arms are long-ish. I don't know exactly where I'm at relative to my height, but kind of, let's say, medium long arms. I use a 200 centimeter paddle for freestyle kayaking, and my creaking paddle is usually a 200 or a 202. So not the longest on the market, but at the longer end. Quite often when I meet people, even who are a little bit shorter than me, they're using paddles that are much shorter, like in the 191 to 194 range. I would say generally, even if you're only a few centimeters shorter than me, you're going to want a paddle length that's kind of similar to where I'm at, or at the higher end. The difference between 191 and 197 is actually pretty significant, and if you're not sure what I mean, try and go to a place where you can paddle two different paddle lengths, or maybe find two friends who've got those two paddle lengths and try it out for yourself so you can figure out what length is right for you. But I would say generally longer is going to be better for a lot of things. It's going to make your roll a lot easier. It's going to make turning strokes a lot easier. So think about what paddle length you're using now, and think about maybe go try some other paddles out and see if you like it more, and then think about making the switch. I really like 200, I really like 202, 197 I find a little short for me. It's still manageable, I use it fine, but I definitely prefer those like 200, 202 zone. There's definitely some times where 202 is a bit too long, where I'm like hitting the bottom a lot. For the most part, I really like it. That's kind of the zone I always shoot for with paddles. So that's kind of all I've got to say for this week on paddle length. Think about it. Think about what length you have right now. And do keep in mind, if you're using a really old paddle and it was like 197 when you got it, a lot of the length can get worn out, right? And the edges of the blades wear down over time. So maybe give your paddle a remeasure. Think about where it's at, and maybe it's time to move it on, or move it on to someone else, to a kid or someone much smaller than you, and get something newer, longer, and just make your life a little bit easier. I think this is one of those small things that can make a big impact, like I talk about quite frequently. And look at what you're doing right now and see if there's room for you to make an improvement there just by making a quick change. That's all I got for this week. I'll see you in next week's video. Peace.